All right, so our today's topic is about making and receiving offers. And we can get as granular as we want, but I mean, first, just kind of start off, those of us that have written an offer in the last week or months, there's definitely some differences, some things that we're seeing multiple offers in some places and stuff kind of sticking around. What are you guys seeing out there in the way of intensity in the market?
I found that it's really kind of based is if it's got any kind of a view or it's one level, moderately updated, they're going quick. But if it's something that needs any kind of work to be done or the area isn't ideal, then it's sitting and there's been some price drops. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay. Anybody else? Vance, what's it like out there in Virginia?
If the property is priced right and in move-in condition, they're getting multiple offers and going for above list.
Okay.
What we're seeing is the relationships agents have with other agents is really meaningful right now. Big deal for sure.
Yeah, I know, and maybe anybody else can speak to this, but if I know the agent on the other side and I'm representing the buyer or the seller, there's a difference, right? There's really a difference in that transaction. It doesn't necessarily mean that the client gets the offer accepted or not, but there certainly is more of an advantage to get intel information, that kind of stuff. Try to be nice to agents unless they're not nice to you, then slash their tires, or something like that. No, I'm just kidding.
Now then still be nice and kill them with kindness.
Kill them with kindness. Yeah, good, Leanne. I like that. Okay. All right, so let's break down. Let's just start as a representing a buyer. When you're looking at writing an offer on a property, kind of walk me through the process that you believe gives you the best success. What are kind of your tips? I'll just pick on Alan for starters. What are kind of your tips to preparing when your buyer says, yeah, we want to write an offer? What do you do?
Well, I'll use an example of yesterday. Just had a big heart-to-heart with a buyer because it's hard to stomach some of the terms that you need to include in your offer. If you are writing an offer on one of those homes that Leanne just described, clean, move in, has some nice desirable features. So I'm trying to take a couple steps back, and with this client, we missed out on a house last week, and just went through step by step on waiving this, waiving that, increasing this dollar amount, perhaps selling her house that she didn't want to sell to be a buyer. Where am I going to live? Well, during the pandemic, we had people living with families or renting somewhere or doing anything possible to put themselves in a position to be able to purchase. So that was an example of this week. What I had to do is just lay the groundwork, help them understand what was going on in the market. I mean, for what Vance described, that's what I've been involved with a few times lately.
So have you been out showing them homes, Alan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Showing them homes. We've written one offer. Luckily she's a repeat client of 3 times. So we have a great relationship, great trust. But they now have never purchased in this exact type of market. And so it's hard on people.
Yeah. Anybody have any tips on how to kind of communicate this without sounding like you're telling them to give away the farm? No, we just kind of deal with it.
Well, I mean, I think it's a conversation that, your job, whether you're a buyer rep or a seller rep, is to get the best possible price and terms. So what I discuss with them is that on the buyer side, if you're having to compete, price isn't necessarily the only consideration, and terms isn't necessarily the only consideration. And I can demonstrate to you how if we can get you into this property and you'll own it for some time, because real estate is not a get rich quick and it's not an ATM. If you'll own it for some time, then that time will make you look like a genius. And so the goal right now is to not miss out on an opportunity that is really important for you to have now versus you continuing to miss out, and maybe interest rates change, but prices certainly are going to go up, and terms aren't necessarily going to get better based on the trajectory that we're on right now.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that 100%. For me, I tend to sit down and do a buyer presentation that outlines the heat of the market right now. And I utilize info sparks for showing like the 3 to 5 year window, but also showing the seasonality, the parabolas, right? Where it goes like that. And I say, here we are right here, right now. Now, when we get up here where there's a lot more buyers in the market, there's more competition. So I don't say when we get to spring, there's more houses available. I say when we get to up here, that's more competition because there's more transactions happening. Yes, more homes are coming on, but also more buyers are hitting the market. So I allow them the information so that they actually can make the decision and understand what, what kind of market they're facing, and where would their advantages be. Does anybody do a buyer presentation, like sit down, kind of go over the market? Yeah, Joe, you do? Okay.
We'll figure out how to do it. I mean, I'll do it in a kitchen on the first house I show. I'll do it in the office. I'll do it over Zoom. Chris and I did one yesterday, just over a 3-way call where, we had done some initial stuff. A lot of the initial stuff was done over Zoom. And part of that's just the way that I'm operating in multiple locations right now. But they got their pre-approval letter in hand. And so we had a phone meeting to say, okay, hey, let's talk about the next steps. And I've got my notes right here. First one was making sure we had the lender's information because they were using a lender we didn't recommend. Second was going over what multiple offers look like, sending them resources on that. Third was advising because of the market that we should shop below their maximum pre-approved amount. And fourth was a summary of the disclosures and the agency agreement that we were going to send them to e-sign to hire us. That's our tie down on that to get started. And that all went fabulously. And Chris is showing them the property today at 3 o'clock.
All right, cool. Megan, what's your presentation like?
Well, it's similar. I haven't had a ton, but I have a couple clients that their price range is tough. I have 2 first-time home buyers using the info sparks to just kind of, because at first they were really putting it off and just kind of showing that, look, the longer that you wait, the tougher it can be. Been trying to pull in a lender at the same time to kind of talk in the expertise that I can't, to really give them a visual, and also in meeting with buyers, trying to break down what they're envisioning on what it's going to look like, and that you don't have to come to the table with $20,000 down, and that there's other options out there, so you have to kind of get over those. But so some of them, you've kind of just, I guess, stroking them for a bit. I don't know, it's like, because there's not a ton out there. And they are going quickly in those price ranges. So at least the ones that I have. And then on the other side, I a client who we need to sell their place and get them into another. And I think it's just thawing out. So they've kind of put a hold on everything. And so we're just kind of sitting there and like, okay, so let's get back out there. Let's look at some things. There's some hesitation. So it's just getting past so many hesitations. So, there's a book way to do a presentation. And then there's that relationship side that I'm realizing you have to coax just a little bit more. But I'm always doing a presentation, and using those info sparks are amazing for tools for me as well. But
yeah, I think that the ability to use Zoom on a buyer presentation is really good. Like the fact that it's accepted. I guess I prefer it to in person because I can show and tell. Like in person, it's a little bit harder to show and tell. In this instance, I could really drill down to their search results and kind of look at, okay, well, what is it you're looking for, and what's the neighborhood? Okay, based on this, there were 5 of them that came up last year. Should we maybe expand your search if you want to find a home? You know what I mean? So it's a little bit more interactive in order to get them motivated to move forward. Okay, anybody else? And this is at the phase where you're helping educate them about the pace of the market. Any other tips or things that you comments?
Could I add something, please?
Yeah, of course.
Something that's worked for me a number of times over the last few years when the market's been intense. When I have a referral, I'll ask them right up front. Besides, obviously, that the client has been referred, what did the person who referred you tell you about their experience? What did they tell you about the market? What did they tell you about, and I'm thinking back to the end of 2022, I had a client who had made 3 offers, didn't get the house. They were extremely frustrated. And I asked them I said, here, let's go back to some of the questions we started with. What did the person who referred him was named Nomer? What did Nomer say to you? What did he tell you? And so they called him and asked basically to have him repeat what they had said. You're going to need to waive these things. That helps me to have them listen to the person who referred them to me in the first place.
Yeah. So that's especially important to have firsthand, or I guess secondhand knowledge, verifying what had to happen. So it's not just used as the agent that stands to benefit, right, from them waiving these things and getting into contract. And having first, I think that's like one of the best things is when you can ask, what are your friends saying the market's like? What are your friends saying, or your family, or your father, or your whatever it is saying about the market, and to try and understand what their perspective is. Okay.
I mean, everybody lives somewhere and they think they know everything. And so that's fine, but I'm talking about somebody who has experience buying a house. What did he tell you? And in this case, that Nomer said to these 2 clients, I can tell you, he said, I can tell you right now, you're not listening. He said, Jim's telling you what to do and you aren't listening. So
that's good. Mavash, this was your topic. So do you have anything additional question along this part of the process that you want addressed?
Well, I did my buyer's presentation Monday, and this is what I explained them, just telling them about the market, the offers I wrote, how we are doing, waiving inspections and all that. And I told them they have an option to do pre-inspection if they're really worried about it, but we have to do it before the offer, stuff like that. And we talked about the warranty, you have the American home warranty, and that kinds of give you relief. I think the hardest part is telling them if they are qualified for 900, they should look for something 8. So if they have to do, like multiple offers, they can reach 9 and they're not out of their budget, And with that price range, they don't get what they're looking for. It's not as nice as a $900,000 house. So I think that was the hardest for me, just telling them, if you're qualified for 900, you have to see something that's, less than that so you can compete in the market.
Yeah.
How would you tell that in like good words?
Anybody got some advice here? Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
What, a lot of times, Mavash, that I'll go ahead and call listing agents around houses that have just recently gone pending and see what kind of information they'll release to me. And you'll be able to tell your client, well, you know, that one house we looked at that had 7 offers and every single one of them escalated, and the winner escalated. You know, they may have not told me exactly, but it escalated around 10%. So that was the winner. You'll just be able to bring hard facts to your client, and that may help them realize I better be shopping at 800 instead of 900. And
Yeah.
that's what
Okay.
I'm going through right now.
Yeah, that's a great one, is direct intel. Mhm.
Okay.
Anybody else? Chris, were you gonna come off mute?
No, but Andrew, or Alan, what you just said is exactly 100% right. I could definitely talk to what's going on up here in the greater Seattle area. A lot of houses are going for sometimes 10% over. So telling your clients, hey, you know, you're approved at, let's say your clients are approved at 580, they need to be looking at the 520 range, because that's more realistic on where they're going to find their house at, because that 520 is going to be ending up hitting their max range because of the what's happening. Everybody's essentially creating bidding wars. It's just bidding wars on most listings I've looked at in the last few weeks.
So I just got in contract over in Issaquah, and you know, when we walked through the open house, there were probably 3 to 4 families there, walking through the house at the same time. And I think sometimes that's them realizing, like, do you see that competition right there? And you know, kind of walk me through the process when you are about to write an offer, you're going to call an agent. What are the questions that you're asking in order to get intel for your clients? Leanne, what kind of questions do you ask? Like when you're about to write an offer, you're going to call the agent. What kind of questions do you ask?
I had to unmute there. Well, I usually call them and I say, hey, you know, what has your activity been like? Do you expect any offers? You know, what's your feedback been? And then I also start asking questions about, hey, you know, are there any special things that your seller is looking for? You know, would they like a longer close, a shorter close? You know, are they moving somewhere else? Do they have, you know, do they have a place to go? Just try to get as much information as I can to maybe find that sweet little thing that might make the difference for my buyer in the eyes of the seller, accepting their offer versus somebody else's. So that's
Are there any tells that when you hear this back from a seller that would give you an advantage?
Has there been any what?
Any tells, like things where a seller agent, so my favorite thing is to get them talking, because I want to try and get as much
Absolutely.
intel. So are there any specific tells that when you hear that, you know you may have an advantage?
Sure. Yeah, there is. I mean, if they're in a rush or if they need extra time, they need a rent back, you know, maybe they don't want to have to get rid of all the furniture in their house, or they want to be able to leave some of it because they're stressed out, you know, then yeah, then I can go back to my buyer and say, hey, you know, if we throw this in or that in, you know, we might have a better chance.
Yeah. Yep, I think that you got to listen through their timing and their motivation and the rent back and stuff like that. Is there anything else, you guys, that she might have not mentioned? That you
Can I add a question about
Yeah.
rent back?
Yeah,
Remember what Dave said yesterday at our meeting that you don't have to do rent backs and the law protects the seller for 3 months? Would you explain that? What was that about?
no, that's a totally, like, I don't think I want to even wade into that topic. But I think what he was talking about is that they've changed some law in there to make it so that these, because previously these rent backs had to, the idea was that would fall under tenant landlord law. So if you had to evict somebody, it was different. That doesn't apply to this conversation. I don't think it applies to this conversation.
Okay.
I could be.
Okay.
Yeah, so contingent, listen for contingent, listen for an agent mentioning the speed and okay, so what about contractually? What are some mistakes to avoid in the contracts? Or what are some things that you put in your contracts in order to help gain an advantage? And if we can be as specific as possible, like where on the contract, what, how, that kind of thing.
Talk about released earnest money. What is that and why?
Is anybody advocating that their buyers release earnest money?
Well, we
I
give
don't like
our,
doing that.
go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, no, go ahead, Joe.
So we give our buyers a list of strategies up front and ask them to read them and tell us what they think they might be the most comfortable with. In cases of released earnest money, why Mavesh is the whole thing that the seller's looking for is they're looking for what the industry calls skin in the game. What's your level of commitment? So if you'll give that money with no strings attached, that's a greater commitment in that if you don't completely close that transaction, then those funds are being surrendered to the seller for the time that they're being held off market. So it's applicable to the closing in almost all cases. You might want to clarify that in your addendum. And it's an incentive to the seller to say, hey, we'll give you this money up front to select our offer over another. And what that can do is, like in the case of delayed possession, like sometimes that can solve the problem if you release some money up front so that they can pay for movers because they might be equity rich and cash poor. But that's all part of what you're trying to glean from the listing agent when you're talking to the listing agent about, well, what's important to the seller and those kinds of things. Sometimes you tier the release. Sometimes you say, well, say you were going to do an inspection, post-inspection, we'll release it, or post-appraisal, we'll release it. It's another card in the deck that you can play. I had one almost go to litigation last year. It was a multi-million-dollar property. The buyer had released $150,000 of earnest money and then tried to back out of the deal and wanted that money back. It's one of those things that's an extreme example that you can kind of, just kind of figure out how you're going to wade through it. You just want to make sure that your addendum is very clear about, is that money refundable or not if it's released? Because release doesn't necessarily mean refundable or non-refundable. I learned there is an RCW on that released is supposed to be non-refundable, but you could end up having to litigate that if it's not clear in the contract. And what I've learned about real estate litigation is it depends on the judge on that day. It doesn't necessarily matter what the RCWs say. So, it's just, are we currently advocating for that, Dan? That isn't something that we're finding as necessary right now on the offers that we're writing. But what we do see is that the clarity from the client to the offer to the seller on what contingencies you do and don't want are really important. When they provide the title report up front, you need to make a decision on the title addendum. When you have a buyer who's very strong, we're closing one on Monday with Chris, that the buyer's putting 50% down. And so it really wasn't a question of, is the buyer going to get the loan? But to the buyer, it was really important that the property appraised. So we didn't use a financing addendum. We used an appraisal addendum.
With 22AA, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then because of the 50% down in the 805 credit score, we got an appraisal waiver, like the first day we were in mutual.
Yeah.
So, you know, but we could present an offer. We were in competition on that one. We had to go 61,000 above list in Marysville, of all places. You know, we were able to say, hey, we don't have a financing contingency. We just need to make sure that the lender and the appraiser all agree on the value. And as long as the value is there, we're good. And so it's those kinds of things that I think are also knowing your form stack well enough to how do you really make the offer convey what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, and that's so let's break these financing contingencies down. So the 22A, that's a financing contingency, and it has three parts in it. Maybe more if somebody comes up with this, but the first part is there is a way that you can have that automatically waive at a certain timeline, or it stays in place with a notice for waiver, meaning that the financing contingency stays through the end of the term, but at a certain amount of days, a seller can trigger a response. Okay, that's one part. The second part of it is the appraisal portion of it. So the appraisal portion would be that it has to appraise, or it gets renegotiated, and it depends. So then when you add the 22AD to that transaction, that's an additional down payment. And your buyers could have added a 22AD, which would trigger the appraisal thing and would provide a certain amount above what they're already putting down, where if the appraisal came in low, right? So I think Joe using the 22AA, actually it's even stronger than using an AD, because basically they're just wanting to make sure. Well, actually it's weaker than AD, because AD would tell them that you're willing to put more money in, whereas the AA is another round of negotiation. Is that right? Am I right on that, Joe?
Well, it depends on which side of the deal you're on.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So if you're on the for the buyer, what their primary concern was, and I think their concern was maybe more than it needed to be, but that doesn't matter because it's not my house and it's not my money.
Right.
Right. But for them, they wanted to know that they weren't overpaying on
Or the
the
property.
home. Now, what was interesting was the home had failed sale in 2022 at a price about 80,000 higher. And in the expired listing, it said that they had made it through appraisal just fine, but the buyer's financing had failed. So, you know, I know from 2022 to 2024, yeah, the market changed a little bit with interest rates, but, you know, is 8 to 10% of the value going to drop in that time? No. So if it appraised at the higher number 2 years ago, it's going to appraise at the lower number today.
Gotcha.
Even though that was above their relisted price. So for us, it met the buyer's fear, need, whatever adjective is the right adjective to say, it's fully contingent upon the appraisal. For the seller, a 22 AD says, in the event of a low appraisal, the buyer's already committed to pay the extra. And with a 50% down buyer, I think as a listing agent, you can make that assumption.
Yeah.
If you've got a high down payment buyer and you have a listing, even if it doesn't have an AD, if you come up short on appraisal, there's been plenty of times I've called the buyer's agent and said, your problem, not mine, click. They paid the difference. So a lot of this is a poker game too. Like if you just tell people like this is the way it is and you don't get into the drama, I find a lot of people just roll over and do it. So now if I ever end up negotiating against you guys, you may not use this information against me. But I mean that's
well, and wouldn't you agree that this is also our client's level of tolerance, right? Like you
Right.
may be a hard ass negotiator, but if your client is like, please don't lose the house, please don't lose the house, then you pull back the gloves a little bit and help everybody get what they want, right? The win-win scenario.
Yeah, exactly. We had one very similar that again, just trying to listen to what they want. Buyer went into contract. He wanted to submit the offer without a pre-approval or proof of funds. No listing agent, honestly, from a standard of practice, should have done that. But our contracts say that you have 5 business days to make application. So the contract does permit for an unpre-approved or not pre-approved buyer to write an offer. They just have to do it within the first 5 days.
Yeah.
Well, part of the thing that, so first off, we got that through, and that was just not the listing agent's best thing, but I represent the buyer, so I didn't care. Secondarily, we're on day 5 and the buyer is still wanting to shop lenders. And what the buyer did is the buyer did a crazy strategy trying to utilize those 0% interest for 12-month credit card offers, and he tanked his credit score. So he's trying to get loan quotes, but we're also doing a rapid rescore because he tanked his score and we got to get his scores back up. And so he's not getting the loan quotes that he wants. Right. And so we get to the point where it's day 5. I have to produce, or I have to at least have documentation. I actually don't have to produce it because it doesn't say you have to produce, but I have to be able to document that he's made application, right? That 22A says there's 3 conditions. One of them is that they make application. One of them is that they have the funds to close. And then the other ones are they can't change loan type and they can't change lender after you tell the seller who you're working with. So, you know, I just had to kind of analyze with him what that was. In addition, for whatever reason, we told him what the wire cutoff time was for earnest money, and the earnest money showed up late. In fact, it didn't show up until after 4 o'clock the day after it was due. And so, you know, here we are, we've got breach of contract technically with the earnest money. We're on the edge of breach of contract with the loan application pre-approval thing. And I'm having the conversation with him about like, what is your risk tolerance and what is your ideal outcome? Because here's where you're at in this, and the seller could rescind the contract because we're not actually doing what we want. And he summarized that his ultimate goal was not to lose the property. And so we then said, okay, if you're trying to not lose the property, you need to do this and this, and took him through to the next step. So, you know, I think that's really important. I see that a lot with agents, is that they'll put what they think is best or what they would do or whatever at the forefront of their maneuvering. And for us, and this is just, it's born out of experience. For us, I just try to slow down and really understand, what does the client want? What is their risk level? What are they okay with? And what is their worst case scenario, so that I can try to prevent and protect from that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to it, because it's a couple of different, you know, moving parts. Our client, their client, keeping the offer together, you know, like you said, you know, finding a way to perform, you know, in there. So let's shift over to inspection contingencies and kind of talk about waiving versus pre-inspection versus you know, making a property contingent on inspection. There's a lot of liability around, right, in, you know, encouraging a buyer to waive inspection. And so obviously we have disclosures that talk about the benefits of doing it and all that stuff. But from your, like, you know, Alan, when it comes to pre-inspection versus inspection, how do you prepare your buyers for that?
A couple of years ago, my real estate attorney said, Alan, I've never been so busy in my life. That's because so many people were waiving so many conditions, and then it was coming back to bite them. Well, I guess number one, I always hope the seller has done one pre-inspection. Number two, I think what Joe's saying, you have to really listen to your client, but yet you have to stay out of the way and let them navigate as they see fit. But my advice is, I don't know of any house that doesn't benefit from a home inspection. Will that get us the house, making it subject to a home inspection? Well, on this house, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I don't think you'll have a chance at getting the house if we make it subject to a home inspection. Would you like to spend, is it worth $500 to you to get it pre-inspected? We've got time. I'll make it happen. We have 3 days until they're going to look at offers. And then I just can't make the decision for them. I give them all the information.
Conrad, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, not really. I mean,
Okay. Was it sure?
I always want my buyers to have an inspection contingency, and I don't know. Sometimes I guess I'd rather they lose it, and not get it because if the seller will not allow for that inspection contingency. I don't know. I just, anytime you can do an inspection contingency, I think it's better for everybody.
How about you, Leanne? How do you handle that?
Oh, I'm pretty much right in line with Alan. I really encourage the home inspection, but when you get to that point where you know that it's probably going to risk them not getting the house, I let them know that. And, but I tell them that, I highly recommend an inspection, and, we can do, the pre-inspection ahead of time if it's worth it to you if you really want the house, because there's too many nightmares that could pop up later.
Yeah, and I mean, from a listing agent standpoint, I think it's kind of a disservice to not provide a listing inspection. Like when you go, well, not every car lot you go to used cars, do they have it, 14-point inspection or 150-point inspection or whatever it is. But I know that if a home falls out due to inspection, that the seller is then going to get less money for it in the long run. So it's better to have eyes wide open, know what's going on with the house. Because honestly, my professional opinion is there's very little that concerns me about a home, a resale home. Because granted, there are some mysteries, right, out there, but usually they have clues to them, right? Whether it be foundational, electrical, mostly water here in the Northwest, or the roof, there's usually some clues that you can visually see. But that's me, that's not my client. So I really, and I have to frame it that way, right? You have to be comfortable with this house in this condition. And so I always try to provide, the assurances of the home warranty. So if we don't know what we don't know, then yes, get a pre-inspection. But if this is our 7th home that we've written offers are at $500 a pop, it gets cost prohibitive, right? It gets cost prohibitive. So, the truth of the matter is if there is something terribly wrong with that house, the appraiser should catch it, right? Now, if we have desktop appraisals, Joe, that where an appraiser isn't going. And what I mean is, the items that are not financeable, right? The appraiser should have that, whether it's the siding or the foundation or all those things. So the inspection is kind of like the deferred maintenance, if you will. We've got a Form 17 that would have some evidence of some issues, and we have a visual tour of the home. So it's kind of like, how much weight do we put on it? From a legal standpoint, I would say you always have to say an inspection is best. It is 100% the best thing to protect you from any issues. And that being said, even a house that is, a friend of mine was a contractor for like 60 years. I mean, old guy. And I asked him to come take a look at this house, in 1905 house. And he says, yeah, the foundation is being undermined by that water right there, but it hasn't fallen over yet. And so obviously that house still standing to this day out in Preston, and the buyer that bought the house fixed the problem. Yes, it cost them some money, but they got the house for like $147,000. So obviously, there's some push and pull there. But where a lot of people were like, oh my God, look at the stream coming from under the house. It's like, yeah, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And once you fix it, you now have a really cool asset there, very profitable. Anybody else want to add any questions or comments about inspection?
I have a question about inspection. So when you do seller procured inspection, is it the same inspection, or do you tell them this is a pre-inspection, or like, is it the same inspection that we're getting done?
If it's a seller procured inspection, that would be the inspection that the seller got.
Yes.
Yep. But if you're talking about a pre-inspection, that's different.
Okay, that's what my question was. So it's like two different things?
Yeah, well, a pre-inspection would be you get authorization from the seller to inspect the property prior to being in contract.
Okay.
Seller procured inspection means the seller ordered and had an inspection and they provided it to you.
Okay, so which one to use?
Well,
One is before the contract, you said?
well, both are.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, if the seller hasn't done a inspection that they're willing to give to you, then the buyer would need to pay for it. So really the difference is the seller ordering it and paying for it, or the buyer ordering it and paying for it. The problem is that, you know, sometimes when the sellers do that, I mean, you still want to recommend to your buyers that they have their own inspection. I mean, I've had just this last year, 2 of my buyers had inspections done and then later found all this stuff that they missed. And so if you just recommend that, yeah, they had this inspection and this is what they found, you're good to go, you could be opening yourself up to trouble because you've just now told them, oh, well, this is done, you're good to go. Well, inspectors
Yeah.
miss all kinds of stuff all the time.
You
So
know,
what did they
an
miss?
ounce,
Go ahead, Chris.
you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So even though they have a seller procured inspection, even if that's on there and you guys waive the inspection side, highly recommend to them to procure their own inspection, even if they're waiving the inspection. They should still do their own inspection because and you should at least make sure you're on record saying that to them, because you don't want to be litigated for recommending them to not do an inspection by not saying anything about them doing an inspection. So I think really to prevent yourself from ever finding yourself in a situation where you're in that particular time where the seller provides an inspection, that they are like, oh, well, they found this stuff, well, we'll just waive the inspection process, and then later on something's found, well, how come you told me, you didn't tell me that I needed to do that, you know, like, so just I would always recommend it regardless if they do it or not, because they could do an inspection regardless.
You know, one of the things that I did is we waived inspection, but then we actually wrote in that the seller has the right, or the buyer has the right to inspect the property within 10 days for their information only. So that provides them with that process, but they know that they don't get to negotiate. Now, guess what? What if we find something? Do you think I can ask to have it repaired? Yeah. So that kind of is the double way to protect yourself. Like you said, Chris, is like, go ahead and waive it, but put this in there. Just, you know, your own, the seller shall allow buyer to inspect the property within 10 days of mutual acceptance for informational purposes only. And now you're allowing them the time to get in there. And, you know, oftentimes if it's a competitive situation, you know, if it's not contingent on the inspection, but you're allowing the inspection, well, then there you go. You get your satisfaction. And again, like I said, if we went in there, it was like, holy cow, there's this major issue. You bet I'll ask for some remedy. Why not? Just because I said it was for informational purposes only doesn't mean I can't use that information for a request.
And you know what, Dan, even if they do find something, right, and they're like, you know what, we're just going to walk away from it, at least they're walking away with it with a little bit on the table, not buying the whole entire farm that's full of all the worms and stuff. So it's still, you know, yes, it's a risk on them to waive inspection, but still, it's better that they find out during the informational phase where they're only going to lose a little bit versus losing a lot.
Well, and it really does, it lands in the lap of the buyer, right? Is what is your level of risk, right? And essentially, I mean, because I will say that, you know, Chris, if you always say to your buyer, you better get this subject to inspection, you definitely might feel good about things, but you may not get offers accepted. So you have to think of some creative ways to protect. Pre-inspection is the best, but after the 4th missed offer, they're gonna be looking at you saying another $500-600. Really?
Yeah.
We can't afford this.
So where do you write that? 22D? that we want to do inspection for information purposes?
Yeah, that's where I put it on the 22D.
The other?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
The,
So,
The other
so I'm thinking,
strategy,
go ahead.
the other strategy that can work pretty well is a short time frame pass fail inspection. And then just
Mhm.
like you guys were just talking about, Dan and Chris, like there's a lot of success in that. If you do find something detrimental, you call the agent, you say, I know we wrote a pass fail. We are failing it unless you want to have a conversation. And all of a sudden everybody becomes really negotiable. So that's a good one to help get an offer accepted and gives you an option and an opportunity. Now, I think you have a responsibility to coach your client, to basically tell him, we're not doing this just to buffalo our way through. We're doing this if we find something truly concerning. If it's what I call Woodhouse disease, it's Woodhouse disease. You were willing to accept it as is, and we need to stay in integrity in that.
Did you say Woodhouse disease?
Woodhouse disease. Yeah, houses are like people. None of them are perfect. Yep. They're all failed in one way or another.
Yeah.
Even the prettiest ones.
Yeah, and I think somebody made this comment, I think it was Leanne, is like, one inspector may have missed like 4 things. It may have been the summer, a dry week or 2 weeks. And then when your inspector comes in, it's like water is now pouring through the crawl space and not exiting it, that kind of thing. So, yeah, not all inspectors are the same, for sure. Okay, any last questions? I'm actually surprised. I started this conversation. I was like, oh man, are we gonna be able to talk a whole hour about it? It looks like we did. We got 6 minutes. I wanted to add that I think I want to give this a shot in person for a little in-person coffee next week. Are you guys interested? Anybody interested? I know, Joe, sometimes you're in Idaho, sometimes you're here. But I was thinking there's the Milk House coffee shop here in Everett. That would be cool to just kind of get together. That's the whole purpose of this, is to get together and chat. Are you guys up for that?
We could do it in 2 weeks, but
In
not
2
next week.
weeks?
But you don't have to plan your life around me.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'll be out of town, unfortunately. So.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks gives us enough time to plan it because I'm already booked out for a weekend.
Okay, so in 2 weeks, plan to do that. We do have a broker event at the Game On Wednesday at 5:30. It's laser tag. So that's for anybody that wants to kind of get in contact with each other and shoot each other in a friendly way.
Shoot Dan,
Yeah,
as we advertised it.
yeah, shoot me. It's actually pretty fun, but you'll be hard pressed to beat me in laser tag. So I'm pretty good at it. So Wednesday, I think it's 5:30. I'll send out a little invitation for you guys if you can make it. If not, no big deal. But yeah, have a great week. Thanks for all the